Hi, welcome back to our series on 1 Samuel, and we pick up today in chapter 3 with Yahweh calling to Samuel. To give it some context here, let's look at where we were in our sequence here. So we're seeing that we're at this section here. After last time we saw that Eli was upbraided by a man of God who seems to appear out of nowhere and give him the word that his sons will die and that his future is gone and he'll be replaced by another priest. Suddenly the scene shifts again back to Samuel. And we've seen this pattern throughout this section as it alternates between Hannah's prayer, Eli's corrupt sons, etc., all the way through until the themes come together at the very end. So let's jump right into our story. There is maybe a familiar story to many people because maybe we've heard it as children, but when we look closely at the Hebrew, there's more there than meets the eye. If we just look at the function of the chapter as a whole, we can see the number of echoes here. If you look down in my note box here, Samora notes a number of ways that these verses here are echoing what we've already seen. So, for example, the boy Samuel is ministering to the Lord echoes here. The boy remained ministering to the Lord. So there's a tight connection here between chapter 2 and 3. Whatever ambiguity there may be about how the books of Samuel were written, this whole section clearly seems to have been written by one author at the same time, or otherwise carefully edited into submission. So, as Bodner notes, the opening exposition is full of language about the diminution of sight and light, no frequent vision, eyesight growing dim, not being able to see, a lamp not yet extinguished. And yet each of these is ambiguous, highly ambiguous, as we'll see. So, the boy Samuel was ministering to the Lord, again framing with 2:11 and 2:18 under Eli. And then we hear something ambiguous here based on what we saw before, what we're going to see after. The word of the Lord was rare in those days. Visions were not widespread. So we have to look carefully at the language here. The word for rare is means yakar, means precious or valuable, which is to say it was a valuable item, like a diamond is rare and therefore valuable. Say the word of the Lord was rare and valuable in those days. And Bayamim here connects with the on that day, or at that time here for Eli, and all the other things we've seen about on that day or day by day throughout the first couple of chapters. We saw early, some of those were translated as years, but we're comparing a number of things about days and times that are implicit in the story. So in those days, the word of the Lord was rare or precious. Visions were not widespread. The word for vision here, hazan, here, were not widespread or had not burst out. Nephrats here, which has an interesting play on words that we'd easily miss, because at the end of the book of Ruth, which is canonically just before 1 Samuel, we hear these are the descendants of somebody named Perez, and of course it leads directly to David. So Perez, a word that means burst out, as it's explained there as the reason for that name. And so visions had not burst out, and David had not burst out yet either. The irony, of course, is that the word of the Lord was just heard in the previous section at great length. The man of God here came and spoke the word of the Lord directly to him. So what does it mean that the word of God is rare here? In fact, of course, in just another couple of verses, Yahweh is calling. For the first time, we're going to hear Yahweh's voice directly. So what it seems to imply is not so much that there's no word, but as one author here notes, evidence of an ineffective priestly establishment. It's the inability to hear, as Polson says, and respond that is rare rather than the word itself. And that will be emphasized by the fact that Eli cannot see. It doesn't say he can't hear, but we've already seen that he wasn't listening to Hannah enough to know that she wasn't drunk. So the word of God was rare and visions were not widespread, at least to the establishment. And in those days, Eli, whose eyesight had begun to grow dim so that he could not see, was lying down. And we're going to see the emphasis throughout here on the lying down and standing up. Eli is lying down, and Samuel will be lying down, and Eli will tell Samuel to lie down. That'll be in contrast with God, who will rise up here. Eli is lying down and not able to see. And then we hear this ambiguity, as again the same author notes, Samuel is asleep in the sacred crypt, which many scholars, or most he says, view as an attempt to incubate a dream theophany. In other words, much like in indigenous cultures, you might send someone out in the wilderness for a vision quest. The question is, if you lie in a sacred area, will that plant the seed for a vision? But as he notes, what happens next moves in a very different direction. Yahweh appears to Samuel while he's awake, not while he's asleep. So the lamp of God had not gone out has multiple meanings. At one level, it's the night light, literally the lamp for the chamber here. As somebody notes here, it implies not yet dawn, for the outer compartment of the sanctuary was illuminated by a night lamp, and that would be an oil lamp, of course. So it's not that it's God's light, it's the light that lights up this holy space here. Robert Alter notes that Eli is immersed in permanent darkness with his dimming eyesight, while the lad Samuel has God's lamp burning by his bedside. But it also implies more. So we'll see in 2 Samuel 21:17 about a question of going into battle. David's men swore to him, "You shall not go out with us to battle any longer, so you do not quench the lamp of Israel." Plainly used metaphorically there, as if David is the light of Israel, and they don't want to lose him to working for the Philistines. So the question here is, the lamp of God, is it just the night light, or is it God's illumination in addition to the Word of God, the ability to see God and to hear from God? And of course, Yahweh will appear directly to Samuel in just a moment. It also implies something perhaps about the monarchy had not yet gone out, but we'll get to that later. So as we just said, as Eli was lying down, Samuel's lying down, and where he's lying down is very strange here. Obviously, there's no temple of Yahweh in the sense of the Jerusalem temple, which would be made by Solomon and several generations later. The word here, Hekal, and I can show you here in the Hebrew here, Behekal, is a very unusual word. It was used here in 1:9 for the temple of the Lord as well, but we didn't talk about it so specifically there. The word could possibly be from the Akkadian Egal, meaning great house, via the Aramaic into Hebrew. That would be an interesting connection, because as the Akkadian Egal means great house, so did Pharaoh in Egypt mean great house. In other words, Pharaoh, who are never named in Exodus with a personal name, is the holder of the authority that comes with the great house, which is to say the monarchy. So there's an ambiguity here about whether Egal has to do with a holy place or a royal place. As I note here, it can also mean palace. Samuel's lying down in this ambiguous place between palace and temple, between royal place and priestly place, where the Ark of God was. And it's being smuggled into the story in passing, because it's not really part of this story, but it'll certainly become part of the story in the chapters that follow, where it'll be the lead actor. So this is the first time we're hearing about it. The audience assumes they know what it is. If we've read the covenant story in Exodus, starting in 25:22, we know this gigantic description of this thing, which in my reading in Come Up My People stands in opposition to the temple that Solomon builds, but we're not going to go there at this point. Maybe we'll get to there when we get to Solomon way later. So now here's the famous part of the story, and already the translation is misleading. So the New Revised Standard here has, the Lord called Samuel, Samuel. But as Bodner notes, the name Samuel is not actually spoken as direct speech until the climax of the scene in 3:10, translating as follows: "And the Lord called to Samuel, and he said, I'm here." And even if you can't read the Hebrew, perhaps you can see that here. So, called Yahweh to Samuel, and he answered, "Here I am." So it's certainly not Samuel, Samuel, which is from the Septuagint, to match the Hebrew that we'll see in the third call, where the Hebrew does have Samuel, Samuel. So the New Revised Standard is going along with the Septuagint, suggesting this is out loud, as opposed to the ambiguity of the Lord called Samuel, and we don't know if it's out loud or not. Here I am is also ambiguous. It's hine, which simply means, attention or alert. It's not a first-person response, but a startled acknowledgement, as you can see here, even though it's translated interlinear, here I am. Hine, generally, as we've seen, means behold or look. So it's expressing Samuel's startledness at whatever he's hearing. And he ran to Eli, and we'll see this is the first of 24 running in Samuel, occasions of running, and many of them involve running with a message. And the question is the runner trustworthy? So we'll see, just as here, he's running not with the message, but what he thinks is the voice of a messenger, Eli, and he's wrong. So he's running to Eli, and it makes you wonder how far apart are they that he needs to run to them, and how big a place is this, but we just don't know. So he says, "Here I am, for you called me," and he says in this formulaic way, you'll note that it's exactly the same almost in the next time. "I did not call, lie down again," so he went and lay down. And the formula here is much like a folk tale, where something's repeated multiple times, then finally on the third time, there's something that shifts. And it may well have been of some kind of folk tale that was adapted, we don't know. But it functions in this, as the relationship between Yahweh and Samuel being established for the first time. So Yahweh called again Samuel, and again it's ambiguous, called to Samuel, we could say, rather than in quotes. Samuel got up and went a second time, and the second time Eli adds, "my son," which is endearing if it wasn't tragic. Because it's tragic, of course, because Eli's sons are corrupt, and we're told they're going to die. And although Hannah has given Samuel to Yahweh, she did not give him to Eli as a son, and yet Eli is claiming that Samuel is somehow his surrogate child, and yet Eli has no future and Samuel does. So it's a desperate act of someone clinging here to some connection when his family connections are about to be destroyed. So now the narrator intervenes to say Samuel did not yet know the Lord. And that's really important here because it highlights a couple of things. We've been told 3 times that Samuel's been ministering to Yahweh, but he doesn't know Yahweh. In other words, he's operating as a functionary, having been trained at the feet of Eli, who apparently doesn't know Yahweh either. Twice, after all, he doesn't interpret this call as Yahweh's call. He simply doesn't, he disclaims that it was his call, but he doesn't understand that it's Yahweh's call until the third try. So Samuel has not known the Lord because he's been poorly trained, and he has to have the direct experience, which Yahweh is insistent he have here in refusing to give up. The narrator continues, "The word of the Lord had not been revealed to him." The Hebrew is Gala. The Septuagint has apocalypto, the word from which we get apocalypse, or apocalyptic, meaning to reveal, or literally to lift the veil. It'll be used as a number of times here, as we'll see, and specifically recalling this at 3:21. The Lord continued to appear at Shiloh and revealed himself to Samuel by the word of the Lord. But it'll play a great role here in 2 Samuel 7:27, which is Nathan's promise that there'll be someone on David, from the house of David, on the throne forever. And this is a revelation which he claims. We can decide for ourselves at that time if we believe him or not, or whether we believe the writers or not. So there's been no revelation. He doesn't know Yahweh, and so Yahweh calls him again a third time. And notice there's no Samuel here, not until here. So he called him a third time, and he got up and went to Eli and said, "Here I am." So on that third time, Eli perceived, and this is a rare word here for an understanding, used only here, 16:18 elsewhere, perceiving that Yahweh is with the son of Jesse. Of course, that's David at that time. So it's a sense of perceiving something that's not obvious. It's not something you see directly. It's a sense of, an insight, like the light bulb going on in your head. So Eli now gets, after 3 tries, that Yahweh was calling the boy. So now Eli says to Samuel, "Go lie down, and if he calls you, you shall say, 'Speak, Yahweh, for your servant is listening.'" Note the sequence here, which is replicated both in the Hebrew and in the English here. So you can see the sequence here. To go lie down first, and before Yahweh is named, there's just the generic, "if he calls." So Samuel, not knowing it was Yahweh and not knowing that Eli suspects it's Yahweh, who might Samuel think the he is calling is until he says, "Speak, Yahweh, your servant is listening." The key word here, Shemaiah from Shema, key to the entire Deuteronomistic theology from the prayer that's called the Shema from Deuteronomy 6:4. "Hear, O God, the Lord your God, the Lord is one," etc. So after 3 false starts, Samuel went down and lay down in his place, and Yahweh came and stood there. So in addition to the audition, there's now apparently something visible, although we don't know what is visible, and Samuel doesn't respond with shock or any kind of emotional response to that, as, for example, Daniel does when he sees an angel and falls down as if dead. If this is like an apocalyptic experience, you might think that Samuel would respond in some dramatic way, but nothing is named. So Yahweh came and stood there, calling as before, and this time the text does say, "Samuel, Samuel," as you can see here, Samuel, Samuel. So Samuel said, "Speak, for your servant is listening." The Samuel, Samuel echoes Abraham, Abraham, or the other way around, depending upon which Genesis or 1 Samuel you think was written first. Those double-named epiphanies from Yahweh. So Samuel's response is, "Speak, for your servant is listening." Notice he doesn't say Yahweh. he leaves out the Yahweh. Maybe he's afraid to address a God he doesn't know yet, or maybe he's not sure if it is Yahweh, because the voice doesn't identify itself any more than it does to Moses in Exodus 3, along with Abraham. So the Lord says to Samuel, again, not identifying himself. So as far as Samuel knows, it's not necessarily Yahweh. That's what Eli suggests, but not identified except to us as readers. So Yahweh said to Samuel, "See, I'm about to do something in Israel that will make both ears of anyone who hears it tingle." A couple of things here. Do something literally is to make a word, echoing what we saw in 2:23. Why do you do such things? I hear of your evil dealings, where both times it was about why do you make such words and evil words. So that's the second time we're hearing that something is described as a thing to be doing is a word that's being made. To hear, anyone who hears it will, their ears will tingle. This is an unusual word, Saul, and the Brown Driver Briggs lexicon says it's a response to a horrid sound, and all occasions are of dreadful news. For example, in 2 Kings 12 here, such evil, when they bring upon Jerusalem and Judah such evil, the ears of anyone who hears it will tingle. Of course, that's the exile. And there are similar examples in the prophets Jeremiah and Habakkuk. So they're basically given divine tinnitus, which is to say that God is about to make a word that will cause them to not hear anything but the sound that God put in their ears. Not necessarily the word that's being said, but their ears will become unable to hear anything else. In other words, their ears and their whole being will be filled with the resonance of the word that God is about to do. And this is what it is that God's about to do, as we hear here. On that day, fulfilling the on that day we heard earlier, I will fulfill against Eli all that I have spoken concerning his house from beginning to end. Of course, Samuel doesn't know about that. We know about it because we heard the man of God say it to Eli in the last scene. But this is the first time that Samuel is realizing, at least out loud, that there's something fishy about Eli in relation to Yahweh, and by implication something fishy about his whole family and the priesthood that arises from it. So now we hear Yahweh tell Samuel something we didn't hear the man of God tell Eli. For I have told him, I'm about to punish his house forever. And here we have house finally. Literally it means I will judge, instead of the translation we repeatedly saw of his family. So we're seeing the connection with the punishing of the house of Eli. And another forever, which we'll see there's another forever here, all playing against the ambivalent reality that God had said at the beginning of the last passage. Just because I said forever about the priesthood of Phinehas doesn't mean I meant forever. So all the forevers now, the ad olams, are carrying that ambiguity of, is it just forever until Yahweh changes God's mind? Or what does forever mean here if God starts off saying, I've decided forever doesn't mean forever. And that will play out, of course, especially against the covenant that Nathan claims Yahweh made with the house of David to have a king of his family, of his house, on the throne forever. But to punish the house forever for the iniquity that he knew. This is the first time we're hearing iniquity ion here. 233 times in the Masoretic text, 20 in the Deuteronomistic history, and here are the examples in 1 Samuel and a few examples in 2 Samuel. And one might ask as we go through, how is this category of evil, iniquity, different from the category chatat, sin? There's no way to answer that in advance. We can't get an external theology. We have to just explore the contextual usage as we go. In this case, the iniquity is named explicitly, that Eli knew that his sons were blaspheming God and he did not restrain them. So if we'd begun to feel some sympathy for Eli, that it wasn't his fault that his sons were corrupt, any more than it'll be Samuel's fault that his sons are corrupt, we'll see whether it's David's fault that his sons are corrupt when we finally get there. But now we realize that the punishment is because he knew and refused to restrain, something that will apply to David just as well. And of course, the knowledge here is exactly what's at issue, knowing God and knowing what your children have done. This is described as that he would not restrain and would not hold back. It's about the lamp and the light growing out. So in that sense of growing dim, it's the same kind of word here as weaken. So he would not weaken them, and it's his weakness really that leads to his downfall, and literally it'll be a downfall as he falls off his chair after the word of his son's death comes to him. So finally, Yahweh ends this with, "Therefore I swear to the house of Eli," who of course is not here, it's just simply Samuel he's talking to, "that the iniquity of Eli's house shall not be expiated by sacrifice or offering forever." In other words, it's all over. It's too late. There's nothing you can do to undo this. So that will be where we'll leave it. And now when we return to our structure, we'll see that after this, Samuel will have to tell Eli this, and then he'll continue to grow. Samuel now has a relationship with Yahweh directly, and he'll be prepared to express both the bad news to Eli and later some other news, as we'll see as the story unfolds. See you next time.